Shirley Pando here with the Everyday Moodlings blog, and today our project inspiration is all about the humble sponge. Sponges can be used for a lot of utilitarian things and jobs, but today we're going to use three different sponges: a makeup sponge, a round sponge that I got from a little acrylic paint set, and a quarter of a sponge that I got from Stampin' Up! Three very cheap craft paints, and I'm just using some hot press watercolor paper because it's close by. Hot press watercolor paper is very smooth. I just didn't want a texture this time, but it is about the equivalent of maybe 110 pound card, index card type cheap paper that you can find, light bit of cardstock. So let's just start with three paints and our sponges, and let's see what kind of backgrounds we can make. We start off with our makeup sponge, and I have a craft mat on the table, and when I use a sponge, I don't want a big blob of paint. I want to tap on and then tap off some paint so that I get the actual image of the shape of the sponge. So with a different side of the sponge and a different color of paint, I'm just going to continue with some repeating shapes. One of my favorite things to use with paint is a stencil, but if you don't have one, use the leftover piece from hole reinforcers. They work really well. Next up is our sponge that I cut in quarters, so it has a round side and it's got two flat sides, and this is just like those sponge techniques we used to do on our walls. If you twist and turn your sponge, you can get lots of different variations in kind of a stippling effect. Next up is our round sponge, and this was from an acrylic paint set. It's very similar to a kitchen sponge. It's very thin. For my next color of paint, I'm actually going to use the side. Again, adding some paint to the sponge and then tapping it off on my craft mat. And then I'm going to actually use the large side and just kind of twist, give a little twisting motion. So now once our backgrounds are dry, we are able to create things with it. So I have one from a makeup sponge. I have another from that little quarter of a sponge that I cut up, and then a little tiny round sponge that was from the acrylic paint set. So for this card with my round sponge, I trimmed it off, and I have adhered it just in the center to a dark pink cardstock. I always save my little edges because you can punch that out. You can use lots of strips to make other things. So it's painted paper, so I save it in my little box. I've got a box on my table. So this is going to be on the card base. I'm going to have a black ribbon. I love black. So I will add this to the card front. I'm going to actually stitch all this down, and then I will add a feather, and I have a sticker, just be you because you are wonderful. Attach that to a black piece of cardstock, and I will attach that with some pop dots. So I'll be right back as soon as I stitch my card panel onto the card. Okay, I'm back from the sewing machine, and with just a little bit of black thread, it makes such a difference on a card. So now I get to attach my card panel to my card base. You can stitch it right onto your card front, but sometimes I prefer to do it separately because then you don't have all of the threads. If you stitch it right to the front, then you have all your threads here, which I don't mind, but sometimes I like to have it a little bit cleaner. So I'll stitch everything to the panel and then adhere that so that when you open the card you don't see all of these stitches. Next we just assemble our card, and for that feather I'm going to tuck that underneath the ribbon, and I'll probably add portions of some actual glue dots on the stem and add foam dots for my sentiment. Now I felt like it needed a little more black, so at the top corners I added some photo corners. Maybe you like clean and simple cards. For this next card, instead of using the entire piece of painted paper, I cut it up into little pieces. They are 1.5 by 1 inches, and we're going to do a design out of our punched pieces. I also have a little punched butterfly, and then I did some stamping for a greeting, and I inked the edges of my sentiment. First off, I added my ribbon. I might end up making a bow here, or I might probably trim off the little edges so that it's a little bit smaller. But now with my little pieces, I can just add a little bit of color, kind of like a little collage on the side with little flags here. And I'm not really good at stamping, so I was afraid to stamp on my card. So I put it on a separate piece, and then I can add my butterfly. Our next card is going to be on a craft card base, and I'm using a paper doily that I cut the center out. So I'm only using the outer edge. With a circle template, I'm going to cut a circle that will fit inside that cut up doily. Next step is to attach our doily to our card front. You can use a paintbrush on the back of your doily and just kind of pounce it on there, but it's another time that it's a great place to use a sponge again. Just arrange it very gently because that wet doily has a tendency to tear, so just be very careful with that. So now, after stitching, I have added some bling. I have added a sentiment, and I'm using a color pencil because I wanted to add a little bit of color onto that sentiment. And now, coloring over top of my painted surface, I'm adding more of that pink color, the color that I've chosen for the color pencil, so it'll all tie in together.